Welcome, my friends, to the Anhedenia Project. Greetings, you're watching SeptumSin versus the world. I'm SeptumSin, and we are on part 2 of the Anhedenia Project. Greetings, you're watching SeptumSin versus the world, and today we're going to cover the Woody Allen classic, Everybody Says I Love You. Oh, wait. No, this is the Anhedenia thing. I mean, how many times can I say I love you? This is SeptumSin versus the world, and I'm here to talk about the Brodown. Yeah. Welcome and greetings, my friend, to the last, well, not the last, but the last consecutive episode of the Anhedenia Project. Greetings! The Anhedenia Project started as a challenge to myself to do something different, but turned into a creative journey that has many rewards to this day. I'm SeptumSin of SeptumSin versus the world, and today we're discussing the Anhedenia Project, an examination of the film work of Evan Jacobs and my journey through the first 30 Anhedenia titles. We'll be looking at Anhedenia present, past, and future through the lens of this creative walk, not a run, in the micro-budget sense. I feel the best way to honor this creator is to make this film much like any of his other works, making it quickly and closely attached to the spark that birthed it. Though there may be many clips of other individuals, this will be a film by me, written by me, performed by me, and mostly just me. And many of these films to keep me company. For many, the term B-movie conjures up the images of classic films, Roger Corman, Ed Wood, flying saucers, monsters from Mars. But Microbudget takes it even further. When we hit the birth of the video store, there was a hunger for content like no other. This led to people with a film camera and a dream being able to put their film out when normally they would have nothing in reach. This could be done with a budget of even less than $1,000 in today's funds. Films like Video Violence and Splatter Farm, done by many pioneers in the film, would have been coined as shot on video because of the format that it was done in. This paved the way to so many creators, especially a lot of modern producers who are still working from the 90s to this day, such as, say, Sterling, Makeflix, SRS Cinema, and even Wild Eye Entertainment. Makers like Dustin Ferguson, or the Polonia brothers. These were birthed from this time, but continue to thrive at this day and age. I'd been kind of dipping my toe into low-budget cinema many times when I was in college. When I looked at this and I saw a lot of the creators here were not out to make money. Most of them have full-time jobs, and even today some of the bigger names still have work outside of their film industry. And because of this, they're willing to take risks. This is something that comes from them for the art's sake. In big budget cinema today, there's just so much money wrapped up in films that they can't help but fall back on formulas to guarantee success because they cannot afford a flop. This really did tie me to the subject. Now, admittedly, I wasn't a huge person when it came to horror films, and that's one of the things that really saturates the micro-budget industry, including this one. But I was pulled in by other types of studios that did other things, because you could still get a few other types of films. Comedy, drama, these still could be done in the realm of the low budget, though just not as common because they're not as popular. I was pulled in because I was a gamer at heart. So films like X Strike Studios' River City Rumble, or Silent Horror, or Dead Gentlemen's The Gamers, these really pulled me in and had me interested in the film. Of course, that all changed when David Streggy and Inside Movies Galore entered my life. I was just getting started as a YouTube creator at the time. I had mainly been doing blogspot articles, a lot of it on movies, mostly movie reviews, a lot of stuff that people weren't seeing, like the Skeleton Key movies, for instance, which definitely tackled that micro-budget horror itch that most people get. When I was approached by Dave had been running a channel just also focused on movie collecting, on movie watching. Also, his was mainly horror, and a lot of it local based to his hometown in Wisconsin. Now, he had decided to get together this channel where they would discuss movies, usually horror movies, low-budget horror with these creators, or sometimes art horror, and eventually this expanded into a film discussion group called Inside Movies Galore. This was a very interesting time. I got introduced to movies and directors that I probably never would have met or understood without the help of all the fine folks that have contributed to the channel over the years. Even to this day, I would say that Inside Movies Galore and his other channel, Delusions of Grandeur, had really thrown a wrench into my traditional movie watching feels. Things that I just never would have looked at. Movies like American Mummy or Alien Dead. I would never have watched without the help of this. For better or for worse. So the biggest rule on said channel was to make sure that you gave whatever came up a shot. Lord knows, I think Salo pushed my limits on that one. But especially though, this was related to small film creators. Dave would routinely interview these creators, and even would bring me on to a few, such as Brad Sykes, or the director of the Slime City franchise, which really let me know that yes, these people are approachable. These people are, well, people. They're not just out there directors, way up in the ivory tower like most. Of course, I'm also about physical media. Dave and I have that in common. And we would routinely just show off our finds with each other. It's really cool when you get a community of people, of collectors who just enjoy the art of owning something, not keeping it on a computer file or letting it sit in the cloud, but actually owning something that you can pull out and watch when you want. Some things that aren't even available digitally, just to be able to have them in your hands and look at them. All of that, of course, would change my life when two little DVDs called Death Toilet and Death Toilet Number 2 came up in one of our discussions. I couldn't believe something so strange and so creepy was out there. I mean, maybe I could. I mean, I did see oversexed rug suckers from Mars after all. But I just had to grab my own copies. I mean, that's when Dave told me about Evan Jacobs and Anhedenia Films. He told me that if I asked the director, maybe he would give me access to some free films and content on his channel. Dave had also been given the same opportunity, and sometimes he'd like to share this stuff with me. So, that was my first in when it came to Anhedenia. I decided to take the plunge. I had actually been in contact with directors before. I had been there in interviews with Dave, But I'd always had Dave at my side. Dave was always the one leading out. He was always the one making the initial connection. And while Dave had given Evan Jacobs an introduction, I would be the one to do most of the reaching. I'm a bit of a recluse, and that always makes things difficult. But I decided to steel myself and forge ahead. Those death toilet movies would be mine. And of course, when I met with him, he was very friendly and very interested in what I could do to try and push his movies forward out into the world. I let him know the truth that I was a very small channel, but I was willing to review as many movies as I could. That alone was enough to get him interested, and with Dave's support, he gave me access to Anhedenia Films on Demand, which is on Vimeo, and normally is $2 a month, so he gave me about a month worth. It gave me full access to a very large library of around 30 films at the time, and almost 50 to this day, yet still is only $2 a month. So where to begin? I had a daunting number of films to see, and wanted to tackle as many as possible. I could have gone for the obvious death toilet films first, but I didn't want to start with such an obvious thing in mind. Nor did I want to start off at the beginning, because the beginning of a person's career can be very different from the end, and Evan Jacobs is definitely no exception to this rule. So I decided to go a little bit more at random. Which the first film was. Maybe I should back up a little and tell you a little bit about the style of film produced by Evan Jacobs. They can be romance, comedy, horror, or many other types. But they always fall into a few select categories. The first I kind of call the full feature. Now, a lot of his early films hit this, but there are a lot of other films that kind of hit this even later on. Now, a full feature in general is 45 minutes or longer. So, anything like that or under that is considered a short film. In this case, I'm looking at something where you see most films today. There's a script, there's a full cast, and then direction behind it. This is, well, something you see in many films. In his films, it's sort of things like Schusterman Levine, or like The Toll Collector. I even think of more recent films like Amityville Death Toilet being in this vein, with a cast of characters, what appears to be somewhat scripted moments, and really hands-on directing. I haven't found a single one of these type of films that I have found to be less than enjoyable. Evan Jacobs works really well with most of the actors, and he plays off them amazingly so. I really think that as a director, he really manages to pull out a performance that is very fitting for most of his people. A lot of the times you don't get extra wooden performances when it comes to these types of films. And that's one of the things I love to see, and I love to see any of these in progress. So the second category I run across is what I call focused films. Now, a focused film is one of two main categories that make up the large amount of the Anhedenia library. These films usually involve maybe 1 to 2 cast members, kind of back and forthing off against, but not centering around Evan Jacobs himself. And even when it is one actor doing it, it's very different from, say, another type we'll be talking about, because you can still feel Evan Jacobs behind the lens of the camera directing them and pulling a performance out of that character. This can work insanely well in films like DV2 or The Brodown, but may not work quite as well in other films like The Audience or Tim Cohen's 2. Even so, when it comes to other actors, Evan Jacobs still shows that masterful hand at directing them. And while this might not be as scripted as the full feature, this still pulls some amazing performances and should not be ignored. So, the vast majority of films from Anhedenia are in the style of monologuing. This is a style where Evan Jacobs is on his own with the camera, and he has an idea, and he kind of talks it through to the camera as we go. This is the one that has the highest likelihood of falling flat for me. Films like Salvo 1, for instance, can run on, they can ramble on for a while. Or even some of the more recent films, like The Last Broadcast, they have good ideas and good following, but just keep going and going until you hit that 45-minute mark. But also, this is not always the rule. There are monologuing films like, for instance, The Riverbed or Angela's Home Movie, which use a lot more creativity and have that monologuing, well, really work out for it. I feel these tend to pull a little bit further. They pull a little bit more emotion out of Evan Jacobs, and you can see this on the screen. Recently, I've been seeing another type within this, kind of a subtype, which I kind of call vlogging, which kind of feels like this is a day in the life. Films like this, like the short film Getting a Colonoscopy, or then there's Taking a COVID Test, or even one of the more recent films called Goodbye, where he is selling an old car of his. These are mostly things that I would see from many YouTubers doing a vlog or an about the town or something like that. And he's taking this as this is a day-to-day life thing for me. These also are interesting and can have a hit or miss quality. I mean, Taking a COVID Test is shot entirely from the bottom of his car pretty much. Yet, there is something about that strikes a chord, especially to those of us who did work during the pandemic. So, I would say that this particular version of films has a likelihood of falling flat, but should not be ignored when it comes to Anhedenia films. There are some other types of films that kind of fall within these first three categories, but I like to put them to the side because I do consider them something different. The first is an animation. Currently, Evan Jacobs has 3 animated films from Anhedenia Films. One of them is 1885, 1986, Insect, and Cool Summer. These are done in a rudimentary style. Not quite stick figures, but not quite detailed either. The animation is very basic, done in a kind of flash style, but still, there is something to this that goes beyond the look. When I see these types of films, I at first was a little bit distracted and a little bit taken aback by the crudeness of the animation. Yet, I will say that the writing and performance in these films is above and beyond many films in the collection. So much so that it pulls you in, despite these low-budget animation skills, to make the films amazingly entertaining, and some of my favorites on this. I would like to look at this as sort of like something, I don't know, like say Adventure Time, where I was very much taken like to the side and said, I don't like the animation style, I don't like the look of this. But when I got into the story, the animation stopped mattering. I got pulled in, and I didn't even notice the animation style bothered me. It stopped bothering me, and I guess kept moving forward because it wasn't a problem. And this is one of the beauties of these, and I know that there are more coming in the future. The last category in the Evan Jacobs filmmaking scene is the documentary. There are 4 known documentaries that Evan Jacobs has done, at least as far as I know, 2 of which are not easily available, and 2 are available on streaming. Now, the two that are not as easily available, one of which is Into the Studio with Farside, the other I shall not name at this time. And those are more of a kind of hanging out with the band, either hanging out on tour, hanging out while recording an album. These are kind of fly-on-the-wall situations. These are very fun to watch, especially if you have a vested interest in the band or just kind of the scene that the bands are in. This is a very inside look into these types of characters. And as somebody who used to really be into the punk scene in the early 2000s and late 90s, I have to admit, this is very fun to see. This is stuff that does strike me as familiar. This is the kind of thing that I got to see a lot more of when I was younger, and it was really fun to check into. But if you're not all that into those scenes, they can kind of go over your head. Now, the other two, Orange County Hardcore Scenester and Sean's Senior Year, are both on his streaming channel, and they are masterfully done. These are very well done documentaries, both of them covering as well any other type of professional documentary would be. So this category is also one to watch, especially if you're into music. I think you'll really like it. So where was I? Oh yeah, I was going to talk to you about what I was going to do first when it came to Evan Jacobs. So I randomly rolled, as any gamer would, and I came up with the film Watching a Movie. This appealed to me because it really did speak to me as a movie buff. And this is my first real impression of Evan Jacobs other than the cover of the two Death Toilet films. So very different introduction when it came to watching than it really did as far as my initial impressions of the man. So this is an Andy Warhol-inspired film where the filmmaker decides to film himself watching a movie similar to a stunt pulled by the famous artist filming a city for a full 24 hours. Unfortunately for him, he faces a myriad of distractions via phone calls or people coming in and talking to him, and this is really where the comedy comes in to the movie scene. This reminds me a lot of an old play called The Audience, where you're sitting there watching the audience, which is watching a play, and how they interact as time goes through. It's a very entertaining experience. It turns the camera around, and it really points into the face of the watcher. It's just a very entertaining experience if you haven't checked it out. But this was very much in this manner. A very funny film, and definitely pulled me in just a little bit, enough to whet my interest. And it kind of left me curious as to where I was going, because this was not like a Death Toilet. This was not like a campy horror, which I'd been kind of overexposed to in the last year or so. So this was definitely something different than I had in mind, and a really good start to a long series. Now I've seen a movie, and I had a dilemma before me. That dilemma was, well, how was I going to tackle this? I didn't jump in saying I'm going to do all of your films, but how many am I going to do? Was I going to just do them as like a big old massive video and just say, okay, this is the Anhedenia stuff, so here's 4 films or 5 films? Or was I going to do them one at a time and just do maybe an Anhedenia month? The one thing I had settled on in my mind was I was probably only going to do 4 films, which was, well, Watching a Movie, Death Toilet number 2, and one other film. But that was before I saw Schusterman Levine. Schusterman Levine is about a boxer. Doesn't have a lot of skill, but he has a lot of heart, and he'll show us by bleeding all over the campus. And this lovely mockumentary, done in the style similar to stuff like Take the Money and Run, or maybe even a Kevin Smith style film, all in black and white. So I was raised by a pretty dedicated boxer when it came to my father. My father had been Golden Gloves, and he was always taking me to fight after fight after fight. And even got to know many of the present champions, like the Klitschkos, which I have in this office, some autographed gloves from them. Of course, he was also a huge Woody Allen fan, so I was very familiar with a lot of his early films because any who was a fan of the man knows that his old films are very different from his new ones. But he loved Woody Allen's old school comedies like Bananas, Sleeper, Take the Money and Run. And so looking at this, not only was it well executed, but it showed a very great understanding into the art of both boxing and the filmmaker's skills, such as Woody Allen or even Kevin Smith, with a lot of the back and forth in some of the later films I watched. So, not only was I introduced with Evan Jacobs' ability to draw out amazing performances from the actors around him, I found that I was extremely drawn in to a lot of this and laughed a lot, to where it is still one of my favorite films by him to this day. So much so that I went out of my way to find a physical copy of Schusterman Levine that was sent to a library long ago, and I guess delisted by them, and it was floating around the internet. I had to have this. And even today, this is probably one of my more prized possessions in the Evan Jacobs collection. Of course, my father fell on poor health in later years, and as he was dying, I noticed that there was a re-release of Schusterman Levine with a full-on documentary done to the side. Matter of fact, this is in the animation style. And it was the very last film he watched before he died. He had not been able to watch a film fully from start to finish, but this one, not only was he able to watch it, but you could tell he was absorbing the information. This shows me the power of Schusterman Levine and Evan Jacobs as a storyteller. So after watching this film, I realized I wasn't just dealing with some eccentric director that made odd yet interesting films, but that I was dealing with somebody who had some amazing potential when it came to putting a movie together. I had originally planned to just do a few films, but this was something that required more of me. A full-on investment, if you will. I decided myself at that time I was going to watch all of the Anhedenia films and review them as a series, later called the Anhedenia Project. This would be a huge endeavor, requiring me to watch almost 30 films in about a month's time. I did add my payment information just in case I ran over. I did want to continue to have access to these films, and plus I wanted to contribute money to this director. I told Evan Jacobs about my plan, and I'm not sure that he believed me at first. I did let him know that if I was to do this, I needed to know if he would be okay with me giving negative feedback on these films. I have encountered many micro-budget directors in my time, and though I haven't come across any that have given me a major negative vibe before, I've had many friends who got quite the reaming out for giving a negative review to a film that was probably not that good in the first place. So I had to double check. I always prided myself on being able to give good feedback, not just hate on a movie. I'm not one of those people like certain critics out there who make a lot of their time on trashing a film. If I'm going to give constructive criticism, it's something that just hits me. I want people to know that I'm doing this fairly. So if I really like a film, you'll know I really like a film, and if I don't, you'll know I don't. You can trust my opinion. and he was fine with that. He said to me, if you can be respectful about it, all means, don't hold back just because you don't want to give me a negative review. Let me know. I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to get better, and you can't get better when you don't have the full picture of what someone sees when they watch. So I had to roll up my sleeves and get to work. I had a lot to do and very little time to do it in. One of the things I really needed to decide on was the format. In the end, I decided that each movie should have its own thing, but I needed to do it in a short format reminiscent to a first impression style, very different than a lot of the reviews that I had done in the past. I also wanted to make sure that I understood the release schedule. Should I release them all at once? Should I release them weekly? Should I trickle them out as I do them? Eventually I decided to release them once a week after I'd filmed all that was available. I thought with this format and this drive, I could give the most honest opinion that I had when I saw the films and still be so close to the feeling I had when I saw them that it can still stick in those short reviews. This holds to the format today. Now, being its own thing, a series had to have an opening. It wouldn't just be SeptumSin versus the world. This was the Anhedenia Project. I decided I need something to reflect what I knew about the series, and I had this skull as a central figure to represent many of these horror films like Death Toilet, The Forming, and so on. I filmed the soundtrack by making noises with my mouth and layering them together. I was never so embarrassed in my life when doing this recording, and every time I listened to it, I blushed just a little bit. But I felt that this sort of thing kind of reflected the micro-budget kind of B-movie vibe that these films had for me. I still feel when I see this, this is one of the more ridiculous things I've ever done. Of course, with an opening already done, I had to do the large part of this project, which was watch 30-odd films in less than a month. And with films like Schusterman Levine and watching a movie, I felt that this would be a very good ride and the time would pass without any issue. And in the early runs, the films did not disappoint. So let's start with the original trilogy. Walking Between Raindrops, Safety in Numbers, and The Toll Collector. So, the quality in these films was not great. The sound was a bit choppy, the visuals were a bit fuzzy, you could tell that the equipment was not always up to snuff. The black and white in the films was very reminiscent of Kevin Smith's Clerks film, and a little bit of Woody Allen when it comes to the writing and the dialogue. The two filmmakers, at least in the past, just didn't seem to meld for me. But when I watched these films, I realized that no, they actually fit together quite perfectly. There's even a little bit of Scorsese mixed in, but I only got to catch that on repeat views. Out of the three films, The Toll Collector was probably my least favorite, but also the best done as far as visual and sound quality. These were movies designed to follow almost an epic love story. of someone falling in love with somebody who was in love with someone else. This beginning set a standard going forward to what I would expect for Anhedenia films, at least for the time being. So I finally ended up hitting the first of what I called his monologue titles, and that was called Angela's Home Movie. Now, I did talk with Evan Jacobs about these films going forward, and he had talked to me about the challenges of putting together these films. Those early films, he had to chase down actors, he had to get what he wanted out of them, he had to find filming times, coordinate schedules, and this was very difficult. But for something like Angela's Home Movie, which is what inspired him to do this monologue type, he was able to do this with just himself, his camera, and an idea. This made for quick and easy filmmaking and led to many, many, many films that we'll be discussing today. So this film was about a guy who gambles for a living, and he decided to put together a tape for his daughter so that she'd have something to remember him by. This film is very different from the rest. There's not much of a cast, unless you count the guy at the end. And it's mostly just Evan Jacobs in his car talking to the camera. There was still a level of intensity that built during the film that really showed the length and the ability that Evan Jacobs has in his acting. This is a man that can pull out an amazing performance when inspired to do so. And for a film that just had one person in it, it showed that many things can be possible, even with just a camera and one guy. No complex dialogue, no in-depth scripts, no coordination, just a man and his camera and a dream. This, of course, would be for better or for worse in the future of Anhedenia films. But I didn't realize that yet. To me, this was just another amazing film, and it really did knock things out of the park for me. I was quite impressed with it, and I couldn't wait to see what was next. And what was next was the first of the animated films, 1985, 1986. So, a lot of times I ended up having to watch some films just together. And in this case, I watched the two animated films, 1985, 1986, and Insect together, just so I could have some like films. This still applied throughout most of my watch, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go. But 1985, 1986 is about this kid Errol, and Errol is going into middle school for the first time. And this shows a lot of changes as kids start to be less kids and more teens as they move towards adulthood. The character design and depth was spectacular. The story drew me in ways that I thought weren't possible when it came to animated features of this quality. And the music was extremely good.
Everything is different, going another way. I'm not sure what I'm gonna be, got no choice of what I'm becoming. I'm not sure what I'm gonna be, got no choice, I'm becoming a jaded.
Was the good follow-up for this. It followed two brothers who had just lost their mother, and this was not long after losing their father. They were spending the last months in their house as they finished out the school year before they had to move in with relatives until they can become adults and live on their own. Unfortunately, there are a lot of signs that point to their mother's death and the disappearance of others happening more mysteriously and more of a sinister thing than they would have thought of normally. This mixed sound and visual quality allowed this to be a disturbing and intriguing film that to this day is one of my favorites of the animated films. This is one that I would probably recommend to. It's not as deep as 1985-1986, which is probably my favorite overall, but it's also just more of a fun horror movie, and many people who are coming into this are probably into this for the horror. So I would probably recommend this as the first to go into. This was also my very first Evan Jacobs horror film. I didn't know what to expect when it came to the Death Toilet movies, but I had a little bit of something, a little hint of what was yet to come. And we were going to see a lot more horror from here. Of course, you can't have over 30 films and have them all be bangers. And that's sad, because I was on a high. I was flying. These were amazing films. I was up in the air. An audience was the first one to shoot me down. This is one that I called more of a focused film, but was close to a monologue type. It didn't follow Evan Jacobs, but he was the one behind the camera, about this guy driving to Vegas after a breakup with his girlfriend. The film was such a disappointment to me because I was used to just all the highs, and this just didn't fit in with the other films for me. It also went on for much longer than it needed to. And to me, whenever I would review a film, there were two major sins. I have to have some like for a character, and I don't like to be bored. So if you're bored and I don't like your characters, you're going to have a hard time with me. And I was bored, and I didn't really like the character. The performance was great. Yet, I felt truly bad about talking about this film the way I did. I had felt that the movie was a bit of a fluke for me. I mean, Angela's Home movie was done in a similar format, and it still came out quite good. And the payoff at the end was quite spectacular, even if it was a bit dark. To this day, it's hard for me to watch, and yet the actor involved would go on to some amazing material later on. Woody Allen had once said that he keeps writing and throwing things at the wall so that likely a few will actually stick. I do feel that this is the case for Evan Jacobs, who throws a ton of things at the wall. But in my opinion, it's not about seeing what sticks, it's more about what doesn't stick. So following up Audience with Orange County Hardcore Scenester was a bit of a whiplash. I went from feeling kind of down and bored to being quite pumped and happy. This is a documentary about the punk scene in Orange County in the 90s. It was a bit of a slice of the time, but gives you an idea as to where it was and where it's going. This was filled with amazing charm and a lot of information that even I didn't know. To this day, you can still find a lot of additional material posted to the Anhedenia Films YouTube channel. There are multiple documentaries that Evan Jacobs has done, and the two that are on here just still amaze me with the quality. One of my hopes with this film is that it will eventually get a follow-up. There's so much material, I could see it being re-edited and made into a multi-part series. So after this, I finally got to get my real first horror experience. That was not Death Toilet. Because we actually have the DV series. I think that really when you think of the Anhedenia films and you're thinking horror, there are two horror series that come to mind. One is Death Toilet, but the other is DV, which has currently 5 films under its belt, and both of these series continue to move on. Death Toilet's only got 4. Now, admittedly, we're getting number 5 this year, but DV had hit 5 a while back, and I'm sure is due out for a 6 anytime now. So when it comes to recurrent horror films in the catalog, these films are about a digital camera that was possessed by the spirit of a killer. The first 2 were done in monologue style, while the other was more of a focus style, or really even a full format style, with a family talking to one another. I admit I wasn't as big a fan of the first and third films, feeling that the films could drag from time to time, and a lot of times, especially the first film, you would get stuck in that rambling mess. But I was used to that with the audience, and I was able to stick it out. 2, on the other hand, really got me. I wasn't expecting what I got. The lead in this film gave me a haunting and creepy performance that even to this day creeps me out when I watch it. And that is a very hard thing to do for a person desensitized through recurrent horror viewings. To this day, DV2 is my favorite in the collection. So if a horror fan were to ask me about Anhedenia films, because of Death Toilet, I would most certainly point them into DV's direction. There are a few films in the Anhedenia catalog that leave me currently with no impression. These are films that I really need to watch again, as I had enough to form an opinion over my initial view, but none of it has stuck with me. And in the horror category, Water Damage and The Forming, and even Boxing Time, though that's a monologue film, they just still to this day do not speak to me. Maybe with repeat viewings I'll be able to get into them, especially considering as there is a part in my mind, something in the back of my head that tells me Water Damage and The Forming are films that should stick with me more. They have some amazing points of interest that should draw me in, with Water Damage having a very psychological horror effect and The Forming having a cool haunted house vibe. I do feel in the end these are more of a casualty of me overstuffing myself with Anhedenia than any fault of their own. So after Water Damage came The Brodown. Now this one left me with quite the impression. This was one of those focused films which relied on Evan Jacobs and one other person, as they were driving over to have Evan Jacobs record this guy beating up this dude that was messing with the other guy's girlfriend or something like that. And this film was hilarious. The chemistry between the two actors was amazing. It had me laughing quite a bit, and at the end, I was very amused. I think that The Brodown itself just spoke to me on how well Evan Jacobs can pull a performance out of somebody and even bounce it off when he does this back and forth. And we'll get to see more of that as we go along. So the next film was Tim Cohen's Amazing Adventures in Cardboard Box Time Travel. Try saying that 5 times fast. This movie was about a guy who feels you can travel back in time just by using a cardboard box. I have a whole bunch of time travel equipment right back here. He's very obsessed with that grassy knoll and the Kennedy assassination. I felt this film involved some depth in writing. It had a lot of similarities to something like K-Pax, where it left you kind of wondering if the guy is actually crazy, or if something real is going on. It does answer that question at the end, but I'll leave that as a surprise for you who might be watching. To me, this showed me that yes, a good performance with a good ensemble was indeed possible at this time. It hit me in a way that I didn't think it would. Now, the sequel, Tim Cohen 2, disappointed me greatly. Because that one was one of those focused features where it was just them walking and talking. It started out very strong and then kind of dropped me. I am sad about that, but I do hope that the third film, which may come out in the future, will sort it all out in the end. So let's talk about Fleas. Fleas was a very tough watch for me, but not the same way that Audience or DV was a tough watch. This was a tough watch because it was built on the brain's ability to fill in the blanks. If you're looking at power lines from a distance and you see little lines connecting it, it's not that you can see those lines, it's that your brain is filling it in for you. It is able to fill in the dots better than any computer program. So with Fleas, you don't have to show the gore to have you experience the revulsion and the just general shivers you get from that gore. This is about a guy who ended up getting kind of stung or something by an insect and is constantly obsessing over this itching and this feeling that this insect is digging on him or eating him, and it eventually leads to something very disturbing with a little bit of sawing sound. The sequel, which comes later, and we won't be talking about that, expands upon this greatly. I have a feeling that out of a lot of these horror series, Fleas is one that has been consistently right on the money. So, I'd been, for the most part, riding on a decent level. I've never really been truly let down by an Anhedenia film. Even some of the lower ends were, for the most part, enjoyable at some level or another. But that was when I hit Salvo 1. This is a story about a guy who was trapped in his hotel room after the bombs fell, and that's it. He's slowly kind of going more insane as time goes. And I can't really fully comment on how I felt watching this. So let my past self elaborate. This is another one of those that has a lot of cool ideas. Just I don't feel like it quite made it on the execution. Still, I feel like this is one that I could get on physical media. Again, I would love to know more. I would love to see more on this. I'm hoping in future efforts we'll see some of these amazing concepts, but the level of execution that I know has already been possible by this group. In the end, Salvo 1 will probably still remain my least favorite of the Anhedenia films. The Reckoning was a pretty good recovery film from Salvo 1. This is a horror film, but unlike some of the other films like Water Damage or The Forming, this one stuck with me a lot more. This is a film about the haunting of a promoter by a boxer. This utilizes some of the interviewing format that is seen in other films, like Haymaker to be one of the more recent, and it does an amazing job layering in the special effects and the intensity as it builds. This one is quite memorable. It still hits me today, and I do look forward to watching it again on my third or fourth rewatch. After all this time, we finally get to the park. which had Evan Jacobs once again squared off with the late Isaac from DV2, as they are filming a movie but come across something they didn't fully expect. This is probably the film I am the most conflicted over. Usually when I look at one of these films, I either like it or I don't. I'm either like, it's alright, it's not so good, or I really love it. This one was right there in the middle, because I really loved some of the parts. Many of these were handled beautifully. The interaction between the actors, and of course the scene where they're trying to learn how to use a gun, is amazing. I love how they work in the paranoia and all the other aspects, filming over to the little disk drive stuck in the wall, which apparently, after talking with him, he didn't realize that that was actually a thing that's gone on. The film kind of jumped the shark for me, though, when it gets to the end, and it's kind of a weird Twilight Zone-style romp with monsters and dinosaurs. And a penguin. We had this film, and we actually talked about it with Evan Jacobs in June of 2023, where I found that many really liked this turn. So maybe I need to find more of what brings joy to others when they're watching this. So, returning to the DV series, I was actually very surprised with DV4 Electric Nightmares. This was one that I believe came a little bit after I started my viewing initially. I didn't know what to think at first. In this part, the evil spirit has managed to corrupt a man's electronic devices, and they are revolting because many of them are going to be replaced by newer technology, as one does. I loved this film. I thought the imagination in it was great, and I still think that every even-numbered film is going to be a masterpiece. So when DV6 comes out, I am going to be very much looking forward to it. This is what the brave little toaster was going to be. So after all this time, I finally made it to the 2 Death Toilet movies, because there were only 2 at the time. I mean, this was the whole reason I started my story. This was the reason for the journey. Without seeing these 2 films, at least the DVDs, I would never have even known about Evan Jacobs' existence in the first place. So this was the main event. All my hopes and dreams were on these films. And they were okay. These were films about possessed toilets and the Vietnam vet and priest who battled them. There was a decent amount of humor, as you would expect with a movie about a possessed toilet. But it was very, very rough around the edges, especially the first film. Still, with the chemistry between the 2 actors and them upping the ante with every sequel, Death Toilet has grown, in my opinion, to be one of the better horror series coming out of the micro-budget film. And it really is, well, a spectacle to behold. I know that Father Dingleberry will be missed. The riverbed was much like the park, where it felt like a film that had a real solid base, but there was something that didn't quite fit with it. But for a different reason. The film is about this out-of-touch filmmaker doing a documentary about the homeless, but he's unfortunately cursed and suffers a horrendous fate. As far as monologuing type films go, I really do think this is one of his strongest. I felt the acting was really good, especially when it came to the frightening change that would happen from his demeanor at the very beginning to how he was towards the end. I was very much into the story and just felt the tension building as the curse started to take hold, as we got to see little bits of acknowledgement and understanding come across him as he realized that, yes, there's a lot more to this homelessness thing than just me kind of just filming it. The biggest issue for me is sort of towards the end and at the beginning with that tag frame, I'm turning into a box.
Oh no, I'm turning into a box. I'm turning into a box. Oh no, I'm turning into a box. What are you doing to me? I'm turning into a box.
It's not that it was bad, but that it kind of threw the tone off for me. Instead of a horror tone or a building up to a point of terror, it diffused into almost a comedic sense where I was laughing at the end. I still have a hard time holding a straight face, and I feel bad every time I do it when I hear this at the end. Finally, we reach the end of the films. With how many times can I say I love you? Don't Get Out and Riding the Rail, which have been freshly added at the time as I reached the end of my initial launch run. How many times can I say I love you reminds me a lot of Salvo 1 when it comes to how I feel about this film. But while I feel that Salvo 1 was more a feeling of boredom, the main feeling I got from this was aggravation and annoyance. The film was about a man talking into a phone, being pathetic for almost a full hour about a woman breaking up with him. While this can be realistic, and even may appeal to others, I cannot say it appealed to me at all. And though Salvo 1 currently still sits as my lowest ranked film, this one comes as a close second. The last two, Don't Get Out and Riding the Rail, were very different films, with one being about a haunted office and the other being about a man seeking revenge. I didn't hate these films, but I found them underwhelming, and this was kind of sad as a way that just ended my initial run of films just with a kind of whimper, a kind of poof, instead of a grand serenade, as I would have hoped to have. And that was it. It was over. I'd watched so many films in such a time span that I was boggled by the intensity that I had drawn myself into it. I had been working 2 jobs at the time, around 70 hours a week, and I was hitting my head against the wall to get the stuff done. I celebrated quite a bit, and even better, I started to work on the project. Of course, next came the interview with Evan Jacobs. At the time, Dave had been doing director interviews on his Delusions of Grandeur channel, and he had invited me to join him on doing interviews with Evan Jacobs. Though Dave had not watched all of the collection, he had seen a sizable number of the early movies and reviewed them as well for his channel, making it quite the intellectual run. This was also my first experience with Evan Jacobs directly, other than by text or other contact. The man came across as, again, very nice, but also insanely busy. He was driving during the time of the interview, always in the middle of some project or another. I felt he was genuinely blown away by the fact that I was actually able to get through the entire catalog in such a short amount of time. I can say getting to meet the man face to face was quite the honor. The timing couldn't have been better. We now had a program airing every Thursday that would cover every film directed by Evan Jacobs. And that would last my regular show for many months. And there are still many releases yet to come. I would share a new episode, and Evan Jacobs would then share them out on Facebook at the time. None of the episodes came across as very popular in view count, but I felt it was great to see all of my work finally paying off in the end. Of course, one of my biggest concerns was when I got to the audience. This was the first negative review I would be giving. I was very surprised, and despite my opinion, he actually liked the review and even shared the thing further. I love doing the show, and the further dedicated myself to moving forward with the Anhedenia spirit. And to this day, whenever I see a film by Evan Jacobs, I have it edited and out by that next Thursday if I can. Of course, the story of the Anhedenia Project does not just end there. It picked up again with an actor named Kyle Rappaport and his YouTube handle, MovieBuff1. He had the desire to have a film that he made with his friend many years ago out on physical release. No one was willing to release this film, called The Shackled Demon Project, or formerly known as The Legend of the Shackled Demon. And this was a shame in my mind, as the film was a genuinely good effort of a micro-budget creator. And I felt like it was even better than many of these films on the market today. I approached Evan Jacobs with the film, and he loved it. After a quick edit to take out some of the more controversial bits, controversial meaning that other people might sue us for having that content in the film, not other type of controversy, we joined forces, and for the first time a Blu-ray would be released with both SeptumSin vs. the World and Anhedenia Films logos back to back. It was a lot of work, with many edits and changes, and many problems trying to figure out how to do the release. This was done not only as a limited run, but also had a poster, sticker, and a bevy of extras. I do still have my copy of the film today, with the sticker. Of course, Evan Jacobs did his part by getting the stickers, arranging for a way to sell them online, which they sold out day one, and getting them on the Vimeo channel so that they could be rented or bought to this day. If you go to the Anhedenia Vimeo channel, you can still buy a copy of The Shackled Demon Project. Currently, there's at least one other film by another director called Shucking the Curve, which has had a release in the past, but it is also released in the same banner through Evan Jacobs' Anhedenia channel, and physically like this, though in a much more plain format. So, I did do a couple other follow-up videos surrounding his work, and those included seeing the entire collection, ranking of movies, and I even managed to partner with him again for some physical releases of his films, including an Anhedenia film collection, which does have some of the lower ranked ones on here, which has Riding the Rail, Taking a COVID Test, and How Many Times Can I Say I Love You, and a newly released Anhedenia Films animation collection, which we pulled together with multiple artists and works, as you can see. Of course, Anhedenia Films and Evan Jacobs continues to expand the library. And as it expands, so does the Anhedenia Project. There are currently 47 films on Anhedenia On Demand, as well as a new era in Anhedenia Films. Evan Jacobs has been doing a lot of crowdfunding work with Sub Rosa Cinema, and this has produced a couple of really interesting films and releases. And two of them are released today. With many other projects set in the future, there are a lot of amazing places that Anhedenia Films is going from here. But despite all the changes that may happen with Evan Jacobs, Anhedenia Films, and many other things, where there's an Anhedenia film, an Anhedenia Project episode is never far behind. This is SeptumSin, and I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Anhedenia